This is the Capitol Rundown.
And we've all seen the ways that data taken out of context can be used to distort the truth.
You want to know the truth? It'll be like Detroit. Our whole country will end up being like Detroit if she's your president.
Now, all of a sudden, as they see the potential for losing this election for lack of absentee voters, are telling everybody, vote absentee.
It's all straight ahead. The Capitol Rundown starts now.
Thanks for joining us. I'm Siobhan Klepfer. We are in the final stretch of the 2024 election, and Michigan continues to be a big focus for the presidential candidates, with both the vice president and former president here in the Great Lakes State on Friday. Let's get you caught up after a busy political week. And we are going to start with the two people hoping to replace retiring Senator Debbie Stabenow. Their second and final debate took place last week, Monday. Republican Mike Rogers and Democratic Congresswoman Elissa Slotkin faced each other at the WXYZ studios in Southfield. Here with an analysis is our Capitol correspondent, Tim Skubic.
Two candidates disagree on the need for more gun laws. She wants stricter laws on the books. He countered, instead of that, more law enforcement of the current gun laws are needed, along with more attention to mental health. She counters that when Mr. Rogers served in Congress,
because he has a 100% rating with the gun lobby and they give him campaign donations.
He countered during her 5 years in Congress.
With all that passion, you would have thought my opponent would have introduced a whole bunch of series of bills in the U.S. Congress. She did not.
She accused him of not supporting a bill to allow the federal government to negotiate drug prices to keep costs down. He countered the measure they passed actually subsidized lower drug costs in other countries. They also disagreed on how to handle Social Security. However, there was agreement on one front. Rather than pay off student debts, they said students should become teachers or serve in the military in order to pay down their debt. And finally, he blamed her for inflation by voting 100% of the time for Mr. Biden's economic policies, and she blamed him for supporting Donald Trump now when in 2014 he opposed Mr. Trump. Here for you in Lansing, Tim Skubic.
Thank you, Tim. A new poll released the following day on Tuesday shows Congresswoman Slotkin is outpacing Rogers by about 3 points. AARP Research released the poll, which surveyed almost 1,400 likely voters. About 49% of them support U.S. Representative Slotkin, with about 46% rooting for Rogers. However, that is within the poll's margin of error of 4 points. 4% of likely voters say they were undecided, while 1% answered other. Coming up next, a new RNC lawsuit in Michigan is focused on overseas voters. But first, a Republican candidate in Congress in Michigan was given a cease and desist notice from the state attorney general. We'll have that story and much more when the Capitol Rundown returns. Welcome back. Michigan Attorney General Dana Nessel issued a cease and desist notice to the Tom Barrett for Congress campaign. The candidate ran an advertisement in the Michigan Bulletin on October 2nd that gave the wrong date for the upcoming general election. The Michigan Bulletin is a Black-owned publication that predominantly serves the Black community in Lansing. The complaint further alleged that a substantially similar advertisement was placed by the campaign in the City Pulse on October 9th. Only that ad had the correct date for the election. Election day is Tuesday, November 5th. The campaign says it will issue a correction in this week's edition of the Michigan Bulletin. The AG's office says it will continue to monitor the situation to make sure that happens. It expects the campaign to comply with the law and only provide factually correct information regarding Election Day 2024 in the future. The Republican National Committee and the Michigan GOP are continuing to push for legal action that could affect the outcome of the election. On October 8th, the RNC filed a lawsuit against Michigan Secretary of State Jocelyn Benson. It argues that rules for who can vote are too broad, claiming U.S. citizens who have never lived in the country but have a parent, guardian, or spouse who last lived in Michigan are eligible to vote. They say that's a violation of Michigan's Constitution. Those individuals could be the children of members of the military serving overseas or children of diplomats. But former chairperson of the Michigan Democrats, Mark Brewer, says those people are entitled to vote. Secretary Benson issued a statement saying the lawsuit is disappointing. She says, quote, "They're targeting the voting rights of United States citizens and their families living overseas, including the children of active duty military service members who are making sacrifices for our freedoms." On Thursday, the RNC announced it also is now suing the City of Detroit Department of Elections, accusing that department of deleting surveillance video that shows a ballot drop box used during the August primary election. The group wanted the video after getting what it describes as a, quote, potential election integrity concern. The RNC says the city told them it was automatically deleted after 30 days, although the Freedom of Information Act request was made before that could happen. The City of Detroit responded to reporters with a statement that says it failed to respond to the FOIA in a timely manner, but says that gave the RNC a chance to file a, quote, frivolous lawsuit designed to embarrass the city and undermine faith in elections. Well, speaking of election transparency, Secretary Benson announced on Wednesday a new data dashboard. It will allow people to see how many Michiganders are voting ahead of Election Day. Secretary Benson says the state already releases information on mail-in voting to the public. As of Friday afternoon, more than 944,000 Michiganders have already cast their ballots, which is about 13% of active registered voters here in Michigan. And that's not all you can find online.
It includes views for county and municipality level data and allows users to compare trends across different geographic areas of the state. Anyone can access this dashboard by visiting michigan.gov/voting dashboard. It will be updated daily from the state's qualified voter file to reveal voting trends even as the election is happening. And it helps us build awareness that Election Day is now the last day to cast your ballot.
The secretary also says this will help everyone stay aware of what's happening with the election in the face of misinformation with daily updates.
And we've all seen the ways that data taken out of context can be used to distort the truth. That will escalate in the weeks ahead. And we know that as it does, voters will become more and more frustrated as election misinformation becomes increasingly noisier. We also know that official sources of information are more important than ever to help center our conversation on facts and the rule of law, on the truth and the security of our elections.
Coming up, Vice President Kamala Harris went on Fox News and at times had some heated back and forth with the interviewer. But first, former President Donald Trump was recently in Detroit, and what he had to say about the biggest city in a battleground state is drawing a sharp response. That and much more coming up next. Welcome back. Former President Donald Trump made an appearance with the Detroit Economic Club on October 10th, and during his speech, he had some harsh words for the Motor City. He was giving a speech on the auto industry, a key segment of the population in battleground Michigan's largest city. He talked about what he thought will happen if Vice President Kamala Harris wins the election.
You want to know the truth? It'll be like Detroit. Our whole country will end up being like Detroit if she's your president. You're going to have a mess on your hands. She destroyed San Francisco. She destroyed, along with Newsom, California. And we're not going to let her do that to this country. We're not going to let it happen.
During his speech, Mr. Trump was also complimentary of the city, praising its redevelopment. But that did not stop Democrats from reacting. Detroit Mayor Mike Duggan said lots of cities should be like Detroit, citing a drop in crime and a growing population. And Governor Gretchen Whitmer said Detroiters won't forget the former president's comments in November. Someone else who is responding to Mr. Trump's criticism of the city is Democratic Senator Gary Peters. He questioned how the former president expects people here to vote for him in light of those remarks.
Well, I think it's absolutely outrageous what Donald Trump said about Detroit. Here he is, a guest in Detroit, and he bashes the city of Detroit. Detroit has made incredible advances over the years. I would hope that the folks, not only in the city of Detroit, but all of us in the Metro Detroit area say that's simply outrageous. If you disrespect us that much, how do you expect us to vote for you?
Mr. Trump spoke at the Economic Club of Chicago as well, and there, while speaking about the auto industry, he said workers at plants where foreign cars are assembled are not built. Instead, he described them as being put together out of a box and that a child could do it.
I mean, how could you expect to earn votes from people when you disrespect them and insult them? I think he's going to find that people in Michigan do not accept that, and we will reject him at the voting booth.
On the other side of the ticket, on Wednesday, Vice President Kamala Harris engaged in a combative first interview with Fox News, sparring on immigration policy and other topics while asserting that if she's elected, she would not represent a continuation of Joe Biden's presidency. The vice president responded to interviewer Brett Baer on immigration, while the two ended up talking over each other.
First bill, practically within hours of taking the oath, was a bill to fix our immigration system.
Yes, ma'am. It was called the U.S. Citizenship Act of 2021.
Exactly.
It was essentially a pathway to citizenship for the... Yes, ma'am.
May I finish responding, please? But you have to let me finish,
You
please.
had the White House and the House and the Senate, and they didn't bring up that bill.
I'm in the middle of responding to the point you're raising, and I'd like to finish.
Yes, ma'am.
The vice president also sought to focus Fox viewers on Mr. Trump's talk of, quote, the enemy within, end quote, and threats to punish political rivals.
I'm sorry, and with all due respect, that clip was not what he has been saying about the enemy within that he has repeated when he's speaking about the American people. That's not what you just showed.
Well, he was asked about that specific...
No, that's not what you just showed. In all fairness and respect to you...
that was the question that we asked him.
You didn't show that, and here's the bottom line. He has repeated it many times, and you and I both know that. And you and I both know that he has talked about turning the American military on the American people. He has talked about going after people who are engaged in peaceful protest. He has talked about locking people up because they disagree with him. This is a democracy.
The interview lasted nearly 30 minutes. Coming up next on The Rundown, our Capitol correspondent Tim Skubic will be here, and he will give us his analysis of the race to become Michigan's next senator. That's next. Welcome back. The second and final debate between Elissa Slotkin and Mike Rogers in the race for the Senate is over, but did it help either candidate? Here with his take on that and more is our Capitol correspondent, Tim Skubic.
It's time to get updated politically here in the state of Michigan, and nobody better than this guy right here, Tim Skubic, to help us out. Tim, earlier in the show, we watched your breakdown of the second debate between Elissa Slotkin and Mike Rogers. What's been the response from voters and politicians, and was there a clear winner?
Jerm, I love it. You always ask the right questions, and I'm going to have to kind of waffle on the answer because, you know, beauty is in the eye of the beholder. What we've talked about before, debates traditionally do this. They don't move the needle one way or the other from one candidate to the other, but generally they reinforce the people that already supported them. So if you liked Elissa Slotkin going into the debate, you liked her a lot more after the debate, and vice versa for Mike Rogers. So in many respects, it is a wash. However, one caveat which does deviate from that norm, which is this. This is a very, very tight race. So even if there was 1 or 2% of the people out there in TV land that were swayed to move toward one or the other, that becomes significant. Because if this race is won by 1 or 2%, that kind of shift as a result of the debate could be influential in the outcome. As for the overall debate, the winner is in the eye of the beholders. That's the last debate, and so reluctantly now, the rest of this debate comes down to what's on TV, the commercials.
Right, and we've seen plenty of those.
I get what you're saying.
Yeah. Well, we're seeing that
Back to you, my friend.
Well, we're also seeing that absentee voting is down from what it was in 2020 and 2022, but it's easier than ever to vote that way. So what did you find out?
Well, here's what's going on. First of all, the number of people voting fewer than before on absentee is due, according to pollster Bernie Porn, due to COVID. Back in 2020, we were in the midst of that, and it was really, really safer to vote via the mail. And so 2.5 million people requested absentee ballots. No COVID now, 2.1 million requested ballots. And as of this read, there are 944,000 people, almost a million, who have returned their absentee ballots, and most of those are Democrats, which is why the Republicans now all of a sudden have awakened to the fact that absentee ballot voting is important. And despite the fact that Mr. Trump et al. for 2 years have told Michigan voters, don't vote absentee. It's part of a rigged system. Now, all of a sudden, as they see the potential for losing this election for lack of absentee voters, are telling everybody, vote absentee. It is safe and secure. So wouldn't it be ironic that Mr. Trump's railing against absentee voting could come back to bite him and could cost him the election if he can't get enough Republicans to vote absentee? It's one of the ironies that is sort of hanging over this race as we move towards November 5th.
Tim, always good to see and hear from you. We appreciate it.
Thanks, Jorma. Have a nice, safe weekend.
You too.
And thank you to you both. Coming up next, we will have a report from the campaign trail. We'll tell you how Vice President Harris and former President Trump are spending the last few weeks before Election Day in the scramble to get votes. We'll be right back. Presidential candidates are making stops across the country to win over votes in these final few weeks before Election Day. Our Capitol correspondent Maddie Biertemple reports on the campaigns as November 5th inches closer.
Vice President Kamala Harris spent the day stumping in Wisconsin Thursday.
This is going to be a tight race until the very end.
It's one of the blue wall states with Michigan and Pennsylvania that Harris is zeroing in on in these final days. She told voters a lot is on the line this election.
Donald Trump is increasingly unstable.
Former President Donald Trump shot back at Harris.
Very disrespectful.
While speaking at an annual dinner for Catholic Charities in New York. Both candidates traditionally attend the event in person. Harris sent in a video message,
which is deeply disrespectful to the event and in particular to our great Catholic community.
Earlier Thursday, Trump's running mate J.D. Vance stopped in Battleground, Pennsylvania, telling voters Trump would lower costs for Americans by increasing domestic energy production.
We're going to drill, baby, drill, and unleash American energy.
And Harris's running mate, Governor Tim Walz, went after Vance for refusing to explicitly say Trump lost the 2020 election.
Here's the good news. If you're sick of these guys, you can say no to them.
And that's our show for this week. Thanks for watching the Capitol Rundown. We'll see you again next week.